All right, thank you for coming back. If you find your piece of paper, I have another question for you from page 87.
87页。
Now, is 5 minutes too long to have to write this? How many minutes is?
3 minutes.
3 minutes is better. Okay, 3 minutes. I don't want to. Okay, I don't want to give. I don't want to. Oh, okay, well, 3 minutes. Okay, I'll do 3 minutes. So let me tell you, it's on. I think it's on page 87, and I'll double check it. It is on page 87.
87页哈。
The question is, what was the objective of many early American colleges?
这个刚开始这个要设立这些学校，它的目的是什么？
So, Jane, what was the answer you came up with for that question?
What was my question? Oh, okay. The preparation of ministers for the churches.
That's right, the preparation of ministers for the churches.
就是要准备这些传道人在服事上，这个学校的建立。
Hi, Paul, would you please read 2 Corinthians 6:17? Paul? Second
You want
Corinthians
to read
6.
in English or Chinese?
If you read in Chinese and we translate it, Joseph, you can translate it or read it. You have English Bible, Joseph?
Yeah, I have it here.
Okay. So you can read it in Chinese, Paul,
先用中文读。
and then Joseph will translate it into English, or read it in English. 2 Corinthians 6:17.
第6章第17节后，林后。
哥林多后书第6章17节，又说：你们务要从他们中间出来，与他们分别，不要沾不洁净的物，我就收纳你们。
2 Corinthians 6:17. Wherefore come out from among them, that ye be separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean things, and I will receive you.
So that's the separation. It's very important.
这个分别出来，这个很重要。
There's a couple questions about 3 questions we'll try to answer before we proceed to the class about the fall of Westminster Seminary.
那么我们先讨论一些问题，然后我们要进入这个Princeton 神学院的下。
The first one is looking over into the right-hand corner of the board here. I have a graph, for people that are, I'm not sure if anyone can see that on the camera.
这个你注意一下，就是他画的。
But I'll describe what's on the board. We have there's little primitive-looking houses or church buildings that I've drawn.
画一些那个好像是
4 or 5 church buildings.
这个是4、5间的那个教会。
There on the screen, and each church building represents a session.
据说每一个教会代表一个单位。
Each church has its own government, has its own board of elders.
他自己有这个自己的长老。
They call that the session. When the elders come together, they call it the session.
就是这个长老会这些的负责人呢，他们聚集在一起。
And so you see there we have 4 or 5 or 6 or however infinite number. There is a limit. You have if you have too many, then you have more. It's not manageable, but you have a certain number, X number of churches, maximum churches, I suppose, that could have their own session within the circle. Those circles, so we have circle A, circle B, circle C.
所以有 A、B、C 不同的那个圈子。那么第一就是有这些个别的这些的长老会的教会。
Each one of those circles represents a Presbyterian.
这个一个单位就是 A 呢，就是做一个单位。
Now, and then we have 3 circles, A, B, and C.
还有 A、B、C。
And there could be more, but you have at least 3.
主要是这3部分。
You need they believe there's have to be at least 3 presbyteries to make up a synod.
这个3个那个长老会呢，他们就成为一个议会。
A synod. So that box around the circles, or basically around the circles, is representing the synod, or in some cases, as we've learned this afternoon, a general assembly.
然后它就联合起来，就是变成那个总会。
So that's the idea of what a presbytery is.
这个就是那个长老会的这个组织。
The next the definition we wanted to cover over was the definition of orthodoxy. Orthodoxy of what
另外一个就是这个正统的这个信仰。
of what that is. It's being straight and true to a particular standard, whether or not that standard is true or not.
这个是根据那个标准是不是准确的？
It's possible that there could be a standard
有一个标准
that's wrong.
可能那个标准是不对的。
For instance, the Russian Orthodox Church is orthodox to their false teaching. They're true to it, but they're wrong.
这个是那个素尔他们也有这个据说东正教。
You know, so when we talk about orthodoxy in the realm of Christianity, it's limited to Christianity. We don't want to be confused with something that's not Christian.
据说我们所讲的这个纯正的信仰是这个东西，不是跟那个其他的这个东正教会其他的那个希腊的或是那个苏尔的这些的正教不一样。
And another question that was asked was about the Westminster Confession of Faith.
讲到卫斯理的那个信条。
The Westminster Confession of Faith is a short doctrinal statement or a creedal statement.
就是很主要的这个基本的那个教义。
That's a statement of belief.
这是他们所相信的。
And so it's what they're going to rally around and say, this is what we agree on.
这个就是我们同意的，这个我们所赞成的。
They want to supplement. It should be. They attempted in their hermeneutic, their interpretation of Scripture, to make it true to their belief of the Bible.
据说他们相信这个信条，他们相信圣经的那个教导。
Now, this is where there arises problems because they may have gotten something wrong.
可能会讲到那个不对的那个事情。
The Westminster Confession of Faith was a doctrinal statement formulated by human beings.
这个是有人设定的这个信仰的告白。
And so this is why we were talking about in the last class about whether actually we talked about it in the last class, but it was in the first class's section about whether there is a loose subscription or a strict subscription to that doctrinal state. Now, when they use the word subscription, that's an awkward word to use. I agree, but that's the word they used historically. They
were like subscribe to the newspaper, something like that, or
yes, what? That's subscribing to the newspaper is similar to that, but it's not in the same. It's a secondary definition. Now, Tammy.
Like adherence.
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 That's a better way of doing it. Yeah, and adherence is much perhaps is a better way of understanding it. But the Presbyterians actually use the word subscription, but adherence is a better word to use for our understanding.
可能就是你同意你是不是要完全同意，或是比较松的那种的方法。
And so when they were, that's why they had the loose and the strict, because some of the men they couldn't agree with everything letter for letter.
因为有一些人呢，他们不能完全就是说根据他，就每一个字都跟从他。
They agree with the general idea of the confession, the doctrinal statement.
据说你比较松一下，据说你就是主要的那个要点你同意。
But they couldn't agree with the actual letter for letter.
他不能完全就是说每一个字都同意。
So I think I got the questions answered. Were there any other questions? Did I cover the question about the Westminster? No?
Why is it called Westminster? Why is it called Westminster? So I understand from what you just said, it's creed.
Yes.
But I guess what are the content? How was that established?
I think I can't. I believe it was named after the Westminster in England. There's a Westminster Abbey in England, and I believe that's why they have the name of Westminster.
Okay, I understand.
Can I make a suggestion?
Please.
For those Chinese speaking or Chinese readers? 我有建议哈，这个你好像问的问题哈，这个神学名词在图书馆有这本书，那么他就把好像很多我们讨论过的，我自己也在研究哈，都有解释，我觉得很好哈。所以如果有机会，我关回那个图书馆，你有机会去查，都有 Westminster。Yeah, so there are references to all the things that we talk about, Auburn, affirmation. I learned from this. I need to check the Chinese translation, so I check this book, and it helps,
So that's another history book.
This is a dictionary of all the theological terms.
Well, why don't you, for the sake of, is there Westminster Confession?
Yeah,
you can find that
here.
Would you mind?
This is a dictionary of theological terms.
Okay. Would you mind reading is it a very long definition?
In Chinese.
That's all right. Read it in Chinese. It's fine.
你们不要自己读吗？To save time， 很简单哈，这个 Westminster 哈，这个卫斯理的公认的信条，这个是有关基督教信仰的主要教理的很简明的程序，它是根据那个改革宗或是加尔文主义对基督教的解说而定的。由卫斯理的议会所产生的。这个大会参加的人是一些牧师跟神学家，他们在主后1643年到1649年在英国集会，他们的目的是为着英格兰、苏格兰、爱尔兰的教会统一的立下一个基督教教理的标准。那么该会有差不多150位的会员，实在包括英国新教各派。结果的议会呢，有33种公认的信条，大小，这个就是括弧要理的问答，教会行政的章程跟一个礼拜的规则。这个信条如今已经成为各地长老教会的主要教理标准，所以很清楚他如果这样解释。So I hope it helps them.
Did that help June a little bit more so?
Yes,
Good.
yes, thanks.
Good. So, we want to summarize what was said as far as the definition in English. Can you do that?
They talk about the history of this Westminster,
yes.
And this becomes the Presbyterian sort
yes.
of a constitution for
right.
them. Yeah.
Exactly. So they're good. I'm glad that helped out. That's a good book to have if you are comfortable with Chinese. Reading Chinese.
This is written in Chinese by Chinese guy. Is Jonathan Chow. I know he's a from the Reformed Church or what, but he's a specialist, expert on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. And it would help, and that's a good book to have for these type of things. Good. A good resource. It's always good to have some resources that can help us understand terms we're not familiar with. It's particularly when we're talking about doctrinal terms, it's very specific, language specific sometimes. Very language specific. So Machen, this statement, I'm not sure if that's his statement, no, there is, it is his statement. As the seminaries go, so go the denominations.
就是有一句话这个一个俗语就是说你的神学往哪里去，你那个整个宗派都受影响。
And as we've been noticing today in our discussion about the fundamentals, Presbyterian fundamentalism, we've seen and observed how the schools have became corrupted.
我们看到那个神学院如果受影响被腐败的时候。
And so, in those schools, the graduates of those schools eventually came through and began to corrupt the churches.
他们就来影响了那个教会。
Which ultimately led to the downfall of Princeton Seminary. 就是这个 Princeton 那个神学院As we'll see that, we'll come to that, but I'll give a summary and then we'll look at it again. Because the churches were corrupted, the governing board of Princeton was changed.
因为这个他的那个组织他的那个委员会有不同的人。
Princeton used to have two boards.
他以前有这个2个董事会。
Of equal number of people.
是有一样的那个，据说几个人平衡。
But then they wanted to have one board.
后来就变成一个董事会。
And they want to expand the representation of the board.
他们就要把它扩展就是说给不同的那个代表。
To include representatives from the churches.
在有教会派来的这些的代表。
And you see, remember, as the seminaries go to the churches, well, you had churches being corrupted, and so when you had representation from the churches coming onto the board of the seminary, that would cause the switch in control. Because before that new board was restructured,
如果这个据说有教会派代表来，那么那个教会如果已经不好派代表来，这个神学院呢都受影响。
You had half the board that was liberal, the one half of the board was liberal, the other half was fundamental.
这个董事会呢，可能一半的人是新派的，一半是基要派的。
When they brought in the churches and they combined the board, then the board went liberal.
据说你如果是教会来的，那么有大多数如果是那个自由派的人，那么这个整个董事会就受影响。
The fundamentalists, the conservatives, they became the minority.
所以那个基要派的人呢，就变成是少数了。
We see here on page 165, what pulled Princeton down was the Presbyterian Church in the USA. That's the denomination.
这个就是他的宗派，就是美国的长老会。
The last militant president of Princeton was Patton.
这个最后 Princeton 的最后一个比较好战的那个院长呢，就是 Peyton。
And before Patton was at Princeton, he was at McCormick.
就是以前呢，就是他是在那个 McCormick 的神学院。
And he was on the court that tried swing.
他在那边在审问这个David Swing。
And so he knew apostasy firsthand.
他很知道这个背道的事情啊。
He was against it.
他很反对。
He taught both at Princeton University and at Princeton College.
他同时是那个在Princeton 的神学院教书，也在 Princeton 的大学教书。
Princeton College became Princeton University in 1896.
这个Princeton 的学校呢，以前是学院，后来变成大学。
But he was basically the seminary was the religious. There were two different schools, a university and a seminary.
他也是那个神学院跟那个学院的那个院长。那么 Princeton 什么时候成为 Princeton 大学呢？是1896年。
When Patton left the university to go to when he left the university, he nominated Woodrow Wilson, to be the president of the university.
Patton 离开以后呢，就有这个 Woodrow Wilson 来了做那个院长。
And that was in 1902.
这个是1902年。
Later this is not in the book, but later in the 20th century, Woodrow Wilson will become the president of the United States.
后来这个 Woodrow Wilson 就成为美国的总统。
He was the president under which William Jennings Bryan served as Secretary of State.
那个时候就是那个 William Jennings Bryan 做那个秘书长。
The structure of the General Assembly created an office of president, and Patton was put in that office.
就是Patton 把他放在那边。
As you notice there on page 166, he had the talent, he had the ability to defend Orthodox Christianity.
他很有那个力量呢，维护、辩护这个基要派的神学。
Now, after Patton left Princeton Seminary,
这个 Patton 离开以后呢，这个神学院 Princeton 神学院。
Now Patton was a conservative. He was a fundamentalist.
这个 Patton 是一个保守派的，是一个基要派的。
Then you had a tolerant conservative follow him.
他如果有一个比较能容忍别人的人来跟随他。
By the name of Ross Stevens.
有名叫 Ross Stevenson。
Again, he was tolerant. He was a graduate of McCormick.
他是从那个McCormick 神学院毕业出来的。
Which we know how horrible McCormick was from our discussion earlier today.
我们今天有讨论过这个 McCormick 的不好的一个神学院。
And he taught there from 1894 to 1902.
他在那边教书有1894年到1902年。
And he got into the office of president by just one vote.
他后来就当是那个院长。
And Stevens thought that the seminary should represent the whole denomination.
他就代表了整个宗派。
and the whole denomination was corrupted.
所以整个那个宗派都受影响。
And Machen had a concern.
这个 Machen 就很关心这件事情。
Machen was the one that made the statement that's up on the board here.
就是 Machen 所说的这一句话。
He didn't think that the seminary, rightly so, could not represent the denomination to remain true to Christ.
据说这个不能使这个神学院能代表这个来忠于我们的主。
In fact, not only Machen held that view, but the majority of the faculty was opposed to Stevens becoming president.
他们这些的教授呢，也反对这个 Stevenson 的这种的观点。
Now, in the 1920s, some of the faculty were joining Stevens to oppose the old Princeton stance.
他们就跟那个 Stevenson 呢来反对这个他们的旧的那个 Princeton 的立场。
On there, page 166, it lists some of the men who sided with Stevenson.
这些人来支持这个 Stevenson 的这些人物呢，有记载有在这个书上。
Because there was tension among the faculty, Machen, who was a faculty member, wrote a letter.
所以这个有在教授这些呢中间呢有不同的意见。
And Machen did not want to keep doctrinal beliefs in the background.
他不想把这些教义方面的不统一的事情放在后面。
Machen was the spokesman for the militant conservatives.
他这个 Machen 呢，可以说是代表他讲话是为着这些好战的这些保守派的人。
Machen was a graduate of Johns Hopkins University, top of his class.
Machen 是在那个 John Hopkins 的那个学校，他是很聪明的。
Johns Hopkins is a secular university.
这个 John Hopkins 是那个属世的那个学校。
In the Baltimore area of Maryland.
就是在 Maryland 州。
And he also graduated from Princeton Seminary.
他也是从 Princeton 神学院出来的。
If you remember the teachers he had, as we discussed last time.
他以前我们讨论过了。
Benjamin Warfield and Patton were his teachers.
他是在那个Warfield 跟 Patton 门下。
It's we're on page 167 now, and Machen did do some studying abroad. He went to Germany to study.
他后来到了那个德国去。
And he was instructor of New Testament.
他也在教的是新约。
At Princeton Seminary.
是在Princeton 神学院在教那个新约。
And he devoted most of his energy to fighting liberals.
他把他全部的精神在这个在带领这个反对新派的事情。
But Erdman and Stevenson were opposed to the positions that Machen took.
就是 Erdman 呢 ，Dr. Erdman 跟他呢来反对。
They were opposed to him standing against liberalism.
他就来反对这个自由派。
Because they had a tolerance themselves for liberalism.
因为他们也容忍这个那个自由派的。
In fact, Erdman and Stevenson wanted the seminary to enter the FCC, the Federal Council of Christian Churches.
甚至呢，他们是参与这个Federal 这个联邦的这个教会的那个协会联络。
Now, the Federal Council of Christian Churches has since changed its name to the National Council of Christian Churches.
后来它就变成全国的这个基督教的那个协会。
It's filled with modernism.
这个也是说是那个现代派的。
Before, this is supplemental from the book. Before you take any position, go to any school, work in any ministry for extended periods of time, make sure you ask to see the doctrinal statement.
就是说，你要去一个学校，或是你要去一个服侍的地方，你要知道他们的信仰告白。
Make sure that doctrinal statement doesn't disagree with the Scripture.
你要知道他的信仰告白是不是跟圣经有冲突。
And make sure that organization is not a part of the World Council of Christian Churches.
那么主要呢，他们这个教会没有参与这个 WCCC 这个普世性的这个教会的联合会。
That's the organization that the leadership, president, and some of the other faculty wanted the school to join. The World Council or the National Council of Christian, the National Council of Christian Churches is a domestic group.
这个全国的这个基督教的协会是说在本国，那么这个普世的基督教协会呢就是 WCCC。
But it is part of it and has a close association with the WCC, the World Council of Christian Churches.
但是他们跟这个WCC 普世基督教协会呢有来往。
The conference that some of the students attended, as you see there in 1924, was filled with liberal teaching, liberalism.
他们所教的是这些新派的东西。
And some of the students severed their relationship with this organization, and rightly so.
他们有一些学生很反对他们
Stevens had a fear. He had a fear. I'm not sure why he had this fear, but it would swing to the right.
这个 Steven 呢，后来也比较怕，他就也倾向了那个右派。
And the conservatives in the denomination recalled for Stevenson's resignation.
后来这些保守派的那个 Stevenson 要自己退职。
But he did resign.
他没有。
The General Assembly had a recommendation.
这个总会就有另外一个推荐
concerning the governing of Princeton.
就是关于这个Princeton 的组织。
And we talked about this briefly at the start of the class, but the recommendation was.
他们的那个推荐的事情是什么呢
This is on page 169. To combine the board of trustees filled with.
就是169页是说把这些董事在一起。
The one board was filled with liberal sympathizers.
这个其中的这些董事呢，是他们是那个亲那个自由派。
And the other board was filled with militants.
就是另外一组呢是那个比较是那个好战的保守派的人。
So you had 11 men on the board of trustees, 11 men on the board of directors.
据说这个受托人的委员会有11位，另外有13位董事会。
The board of directors, 11 of them were militants.
这个董事会呢，这个 directors 呢有是保守派的。
The board of trustees, 11 of them were liberal sympathizers.
这个受托人的那个委员会呢，有11位，他们是比较倾向那个新派。
So the board of directors, so there was kind of a gridlock. There was a Kabbalisti who had to hold their ground.
据说这个好像据说有那种的比赛
But the 1929 resolution suggested or brought about.
这个1929年所决定的那个事情
11 more men onto the board.
他们要加上11位
So rather than having a board of 22 men, you'd had a board of 33 men.
现在就变成一共有33位
And the new makeup was 1/3 of the old trustees.
这个他的组织呢，差不多1/3呢是从那个旧的那个古老的那个受托人的那个委员会
1/3 of the board of directors.
然后1/3呢是从这个董事会来
And 1/3, this is the new group, 1/3 from the churches at large.
那么1/3呢是从教会来的
And the churches sent liberal sympathizers.
这个教会所派的代表呢，他们这些是比较倾向那个新派
And this brought onto the board two board members that signed the Auburn Affirmation.
所以这样的新的安排呢，使这个那个院长比较有势力，他然后又带上2位人，他们愿意来签同意这个欧本主张的事情。
When you have time, look to see Mrs. Lim's book and look up Auburn Affirmation.
有机会你看那个欧本主张的事情这本书也有写。
Auburn Affirmation is denying the importance of sound doctrine.
这个就是来拒绝这个正确的这个教义。
anyone that signed the Auburn Affirmation was saying they did not have to agree or adhere to the 5 fundamentals of the faith plus things that were worse.
所以这个欧本主张呢，你就可以说他们不需要来同意这个长老会所规定的这些事情。
And so after Stevens left, who was tolerant of liberals, we actually had a liberal that came.
所以后来呢，他们就比较倾向是这个新派的事情。
And from time to time, Princeton invited a guest professor.
这个 Princeton 呢，经常有这些客座的那个讲员老师。
We had Emanuel Brunner was the guest professor.
有一个名叫 Emmanuel Brunner。
It's on page 169. Brunner was a neo-orthodox.
他是那个新的那个政教的。
And we have to watch out for neo-orthodox thinking.
也要逃避这个新的那个政教。
Now, again, we have the word orthodox mixed in neo-orthodox. There's nothing orthodox about him. But the prefix neo.
这个新的那个政教。
Neo-orthodox redefine terms. They use the same terminology that we use in our doctrinal studies.
他用的这个词呢，跟我们福音派的或是那个基要派所用的这个政教纯正的信仰。
But they change the definition.
他把这个定义呢，把它改正。
You know, they would say this is a red pen.
这个就是说
And they would say this is a green pen.
这个
You
是
see a problem? You see a problem with that?
你有没有看到那个问题
A red pen, a green pen.
这个一个蓝色一个。
But they would do it with doctrinal words, doctrinal terminology.
他用那个教义方面的这些的名词。
And here we have one of the best school at one time in Presbyterian history.
这个是在长老会一个比较好的、最好的那个神学院。
A reputation that was a very high reputation of the school around the world, perhaps.
据说他们是最好的那时候。
Is now gradually shifting to liberalism.
他就慢慢的进入这个新派的。
They added Karl Barth to the faculty.
他就加上这个 Karl Barth 的这个人。
Among others.
还有其他的人。
And so, this was the end of Princeton Seminary as we know it.
这个就是这个Princeton 神学院的下落。
And so Princeton Seminary had fallen.
据说它堕落。
But we will be discussing more in the days to come about what happened next to some of the faculty members at Princeton Seminary.
以后我们可以看到这几天会看到那个他所请的这些的教授。
Machen and Wilson in particular, plus 2 other men.
有 Wilson 跟另外2个人。
And some students that were to be discussed later. All comes back to Princeton.
他们回来在这个 Princeton 的那个神学院。
So this is the end of this discussion about the fall of Princeton Theological Seminary.
这个就是讲到那个 Princeton 的神学院。
It became worse and worse. Now, were you going to look up Auburn affirmation now in there, or was it in there?
Okay.
I mean, you don't have to do it now, but I was talking to them to do it later. But if you would like to do it now, you can. If it's not there, then it's okay. We'll.
欧本的主张欧本的主张蛮长自己看。Quite long, a few paragraphs.
You want maybe just read 1 paragraph, and that'll whet their appetite to.
Oh, okay. To increase their interest, right? Okay. 这个是1924年美国长老会有150位的新派的牧师在纽约的欧本就是 Auburn 所发的文件，认为基要派是在攻击教会的联合跟自由，由于那个保守派的势力占多数。1923年北美的长老会坚持说1910年跟1916年大会所主张的这个教义的正式发表，要求所有长老会的牧师候选人要接受这5项的基本教义，就是圣经没有错误，童贞尼圣子，基督的死， 乃为满足神公义的牺牲，耶稣的肉身复活跟神迹。I put the first paragraph only. It talks about the history behind this and how they requested the pastor to submit to these 5 requirements. So it's also here. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So essentially, what they were pastor were doing, they were taking away that obligation to those 5 requirements.
那个据说他们就可以脱离这样的规定。
So, and if they had that in place, all these things, all these liberals would have been able to proceed and gain control of the denomination and destroy the whole.
所以他后来就这样影响，因为这本也就是说这样的行动，他们这个欧本主张就觉得是不可以容忍，然后不合这个宪章，所以签约的就强调不可以这样的规定差不多是这个意思。
I mean, it's important to have a standard of some sort.
他们应该有这些的标准。
Are you familiar with the Far Eastern Bible Seminary in Singapore?
在那个新加坡的这个Far Eastern 东方好像。
Timothy Toe and S.H. Toe and Jeff
这个姓后的。
They have a doctrinal statement the faculty signs each year annually.
他们每年都要签名。
Because you want to maintain purity.
要保持这个很纯洁。
When you're out there establishing new ministries, new works, make sure you have a standard whereby the people that work with you, that work under you, have a statement that they affirm.
据说有一些的信仰的告白能清楚，你要很坚持，就是说有这样的同意的心，这样的主张。
If you have a pulpit committee that's searching for a new pastor for your church, make sure you have a statement of faith that they agree to.
就是说你要同意的这些的事情。
You don't want anyone coming into a ministry that's going to destroy the ministry.
就是说你进来的时候，那么就也会影响这个整个机构这个教会。
If they had done what they should have done, they would have kept the liberals out of the denomination, and the denomination would remain in the control of conservatives.
就是说，如果没有这个新派的人进去呢，他们就不会落到这样的地步。
But the fundamentalists, the conservatives, they lost the battle and they became a minority within their denomination.
因为在这个宗派里面呢，那个基要派跟这些保守派呢，后来就变成是少数，所以势力就比较弱。
And after decades of trying and attempting to fix the problem,
他们好几个时代要把它改进。
They left and began their own denomination.
要做那个补救的方法，后来输了。
Anyone have any thoughts on this particular section?
有没有什么问题，或是有什么反应
？Yes, Daniel.
请问老师，现在基要派占所有的教会的多少
？What's the percentage of fundamentalist churches in the U.S.? How many percent?
One person?
No, how many percent?
Percentage.
Oh,
percentage.
percentage.
10%.
Oh, I would say it's less than 10%.
比1/10少。
Less than 10%. I don't have an exact number, but I'm fairly certain it's less than 10%. Could be even less than 5%.
可能比5%。
I would say I would be.
5%还少。
It's very. Yeah, of any even of any. Yeah, it's less than 5. It's even less than 5%. It's very small, very minuscule, because you have.
是少数的。
Yeah, very very small.
那福音派加基要派加起来会有多少
How about the Evangelical and plus the Fundamentalists?
That would the overall general Evangelical or that would be more. Probably maybe I would say maybe 3 or 4 times more than the fundamentalists. So probably when you have in the Evangelical, New Evangelical, in a broad sense, a church that is believes in salvation by grace alone, through Christ alone, by faith alone.
就是说，你相信那个救恩是只有因着信而得救。
That number is probably less than 10%.
可能
which includes the fundamentals.
1/10， 这个是跟那个基要派放在一起哈，福音派跟基要派。
And so among that group, you have 10% of that group. So that leaves fundamentals being 1%, and then the other being 9%, making up the 10%.
可能你基要派的1%，然后福音派加进去，再加9%，可能。
But I don't have the exact number, but it's very small.
就是非常少。So what are the well-known fundamentalist churches still here?
I'll get some names for you. That's a good question. I'll look that up. I'll see.
教会的名字，
They're becoming. See that's something lately in the last since the book was that's something that's becoming a problem. Because the fundamentalist church that once were fundamentalist churches, they're slipping away.
据说刚开始有一些是基要派的，那么教会呢，后来也慢慢不成为那个基要派的。And they don't maintain that name fundamental in the church, right?
No, that's not necessarily part of the name of the church. No.
No, yeah.
Even they're trying to get away from the title itself as far as a description of themselves.
Yeah, 据说他
But
们
the word fundamental will not be in the name of the church usually.
就是这个名字也没有在那边说这个是基要派的教会。
Can't.
How could you see if a person is a liberal or fundamentalist from a few words? Okay, well, also from the Bible, like that conversion, right?
Yeah, I would. That's one way of doing it. You take them to the Bible, because a lot of times the liberals will use the same, like I was saying earlier, will use the same terminology.
他那个自由派的人有的时候也用了这个基要派用的这些名词。
Like I redefine what red was.
这个是说是红色。
They'll redefine terminology. So the way you're going to ask them specific questions about important doctrinal terms.
How would you? How would you know?
Well, you could ask him, do you believe in the bodily resurrection of Christ? Did the Lord Jesus Christ physically rise from the dead?
你要问他去说主耶稣是不是真的肉身的那个复活？
Did Peter really walk on water?
是不是那个彼得真的在那个水上走路？
When the children of Israel came out of Egypt, did they walk across stones? Did they walk across dry ground, or was it really shallow water they walked across?
是不是他们过那个约旦河是那个很浅的水，或是怎么样？
The Lord, when he was in the grave, did he kind of was just faded, and when he wasn't really dead, he was in a little bit of coma. But then when he went in the tomb, it was nice and cold, so it woke him up. That's what they believe. Some of them believe that.
他们相信说他们是昏倒然后那个洞里面很。
So that's the questions you ask. You go down in very important key doctrinal questions that they don't agree with, and you identify them real quick.
据说你如果问他问题，你就会发现说他是不是那个是新派的。
Yeah. What do you think of Jones University?
I think it's slipping away.
这个也是在。
It's as far as they are historically been a fundamental school.
他们开始的时候是那个基要派的那个神学院学校。
And I think they're having they're in the fourth generation of president.
因為有第四代的這些的那個
and
院長。
he's having some health problems, and he's going to be resigning. Actually, he's officially resigning, but he's probably going to help until they can get somebody else to fill his position.
他可能要請別人來代替。
The first president was Bob Jones Sr., which we've talked about. I guess we'll talk about him soon later on. Maybe we mention him in the book, but we're going to talk about him a little bit. He was an evangelist, a Methodist evangelist that was encouraged to start a college, a Bible college.
他就是 Bob Jones Sr. 这个父親呢，他就是開始是那個衛理公會的一個牧師，他是一個布道家。
A Bible college, liberal arts college, and so he established it. His son, Bob Jones Jr.
他的兒子 Bob Jones Jr.
Once the school, I think, they moved to. It doesn't matter. They moved to Cleveland. They moved from Florida to Cleveland, Tennessee, and then they moved from Cleveland, Tennessee to Greenville, South Carolina.
他從那個 Florida 搬到 Tennessee， 又後來搬到那個南卡。
And in the last 30 years, a lot has changed on the landscape of fundamental Christianity.
这个最后这30年呢，这个基要派的这些教会或是这些机构呢，都有受影响，都变质。
See, I think it's beginning to slip.
慢慢的已经
I can't say for sure. I mean, that's my feeling,
这
my
个是我的
observation.
感觉，我的观察。
You know, I graduated from Bob Jones University.
我是从 Bob Jones 大学毕业的。
You know, I have people in my family that have. I know people. So the point is that there's a progression. That's it's shifting.
据说他家人也很多是。
When I have an autographed copy of this book by the author. Right here.
有那个
He was my teacher.
他是他的老师这个作者。
And the fact that the men that served in the positions of leadership back when Dr. Bob Jones III was the president were different than the men that are in leadership now. Each president is basically kind of gets their own people to help them out, assist them as deans of the different aspects of the college.
每一个院长都有他不同的那个老师来。
And so as you get away from you distance yourselves from the battles and so forth. The people that are the vice president of the school now. I know him, not really personally, but I know who he is. I may have spoken with him. His brother was my Greek teacher, or a Greek assistant. Was an assistant, was a Greek teacher. So the point is that there are different people that don't have the same gumption, I suppose. Maybe gumption is not the right word. The same burden. They see a different battle.
他们
They don't see the point.
不同的负担他们有那种的看见。
And as we're going to see, as we saw back in 1900, when the first generation of fundamentalists died, back in the 1900s.
第一代的这些基要派的人过世以后。
Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
差不多100年到1900年。
People that didn't know the struggle. People that didn't know the struggle. Don't know the battle.
他们不知道这个征战，他们不知道这个挣扎。
David, as I mentioned before, David Otis Fuller, he was the vice president of the Evangelical Society, the first one. He's with the Lord now, but he had direct involvement with the very subject we're talking about today. And we're going to talk about this in the classes to come. But he was a student at Princeton when the very problems were arising. We were talking to he, McIntyre, what's that guy's name? I can't remember the other guy's name right now. He's not in the book, but his son, he was involved in a mission. His Cummins, McIntyre, Fuller, and this other guy I should know, Ockengay. They were all students at Weston. When they left to form a new school when they were students, and so they had first-hand recognition of the battle, of the conflict, of what modernism does. And some of them, one of the men, at least, one of them was perhaps one of them went way over to the well, not way over, but he went to New Evangelicalism. One of them came probably, I guess I don't know for sure, but two of them stayed in fundamentalism, McIntyre and Fuller, and the other one perhaps was kind of maybe in the middle. But you see, they had that, and they could pass that. They had something that they understood why they were doing it. So when we have now, I think Machen was the fourth generation faculty at primary Princeton. And so, when we get too far away from something, we're not really sure. They don't know what they're doing. They still have the same creed. They still believe. But I'm not sure if it's. They still say the same creed, and I'm not really sure if they've gone past. They've dismissed the fundamentals issue or not. I can't say for sure. I would say I don't think Stephen Jones would say so. He would still probably hold to and say the same position. He's got a different personality than his father does, but still the personality is just how you interact with people. But it's the idea of having a feeling of understanding, and I think he cares for people. He cares for the students that are there. But Tammy, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to suggest that you talk about their view on lower criticism.
Yes. The problem Bob Jones has had from the beginning is, like I mentioned before, remember Benjamin Warfield, which we talked about this today? Benjamin Warfield was a teacher of Brokenshire who went to the faculty of Bob Jones, who took the Warfieldism and the West Conover theory the whole time. So Bob Jones, from the very beginning, has had a position. They've taken the West Conover position on lower criticism. But from what I understand, Bob Jones Sr. was opposed to the RSV, a modern Bible, but now the ESV, which is based on the RSV, is now accepted at Bob Jones. So I'm not sure what's going on with that, but obviously they've been sympathetic to the Big Four, now the Big Five Bible translations. Although Dr. Stuart Custard has said in the classes that he doesn't care for the NIV in so many words. But these people are old faculty that are just probably emeritus faculty, if anything, right now. I'm talking about Custard and Brokenshire. He's no longer. He's in glory. He's died many decades ago. So. But Bob Jones University does take the position of lower. They take the West Conover side of lower criticism, as do the majority of schools. They do that. It's very difficult to find a school that takes the right position on the text receptus. But as far as that school, that's going to be the best it's going to get probably. I shouldn't say the best it's going to be. It's going to be. Where do we say? It's very difficult to find a school that's going to take a strong position, a fundamental position. They were founded that way, and so I'm sure it's their intent to stay that way. But the board of directors. There's one of my classmates is on the board of directors of Bob Jones. Which I appreciate his spirit about something. I could tell you about what he said. He's got a good spirit, but that doesn't. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about him. But anyway, that's about Bob Jones and their position on fundamentalism. They would probably still claim to say they were fundamental.
据说这个 Bob Jones 学校哈。I didn't have any chance 我主要讲就是说这个 Bob Jones 学校哈是应该是还是保守派哈，虽然有其他的那个院长或是老师哈是能接受其他的那个圣经的那个版本，但是可能他们还是承认他们自己是那个基要派的。
Okay. So, any more questions? All right. If no more questions, we could we'll stop for today. Unless you want to go for another hour for me to make up what we missed yesterday or this morning. But Lord willing, we'll be able to make that up tomorrow if there's time, and if not, that's still okay. So let's close with a word of prayer. And Paul, go ahead and close in prayer in Chinese, please.
天父，我们感谢你赐给我们这样一个美好的时间，让我们能够在这个课程上，让我们看到属于你的真理，让我们能够借着这个课程，使我们能够更加看到真理，能够更加在基要的真理上扎根，好为我们将来也能够掌握，为主你持着这真理为你而成长。也祝福我们以下的时间，也保守我们分散的脚步，平安与我们同在，奉主耶稣基督的圣名。
Amen.